Cruz Barrios says the agents did not give a warrant to her mother, so she refused to get out. That's when they broke the window and unlocked the car.
No! Oh, mommy!
I would understand.
It's wild. Like, this is just totally illegal. Gestapo. Supreme Court says Trump administration must facilitate return of Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador. And no, this is not the Supreme Court going woke, chat. This is the Supreme Court saying this is our limit. Our limit is when you violate a previous court order and erroneously, without due process, send someone to El Salvador. You cannot turn around and claim as though you have no mechanism of bringing them back. I mean, this is important. This is important because this is like either a constitutional crisis or the Trump administration takes the L. If the SCOTUS went along with this, this would mean that like the judiciary is gone. There's no power to the judiciary at all, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. What happens if they don't agree to this? This is the interesting part of the story. I don't know. I feel like last time something similar to this happened, we had a war. So yeah, we shall see. Basically, I don't know. Maybe I am not up to date on my constitutional law and also Supreme Court history, but I can't think of a time where a constitutional crisis was triggered against the state rather than other states, like against the federal government. I kind of want to watch this legal video. What happens when he ignores court orders? This is precisely the case that may happen.
Lawyers live by one ironclad rule. When the judge tells us to do something, we do it. That doesn't mean we always like it, and it doesn't mean we won't try to find other arguments to achieve the same ends. We're kind of like teenagers in that way. But at the end of the day, we roll our eyes privately and comply with what the judge tells us to do. But it seems we may have the clearest case of the executive defying a direct court order in American history. And it looks like things are only going to get worse. The Alien Enemies Act of 1789 is a controversial law that purports to allow the government to deport foreign nationals during wartime. But Trump has invoked this act to justify deportations during peacetime. Of course, so far all this has happened without any due process whatsoever, meaning that we don't know that any of these people are actually members of a Venezuelan gang. At a hearing, the DOJ lawyers asserted that Trump had the power to deport immigrants and that he could keep his reason secret from the court. But the Constitution contains a potentially fatal flaw. It doesn't give the courts a way to enforce their orders. That's why the system depends on all of us recognizing the court's authority. And when the executive branch defies a court order, it effectively declares that the judicial authority is meaningless.
Yeah, it's just like when you turn around and say like, yeah, I'm not following the court orders, then like the entire system falls apart because it's entirely predicated on the persuasive power that the judiciary has. It's the only thing that they have, which is why I was very critical of the Supreme Court's previous decisions, not exercising its persuasive power because they were worried that Trump could simply ignore it, signaling that the judiciary has no power whatsoever. Does that make sense?
So today we're going to talk about what happens if the president ignores a direct court order. Schoolhouse Rock laid this all out for us.
No one heart can be more powerful than any other is. Each controls the other, you see, and that's what we call checks and balances.
And that's a pretty nifty system when it works. But Trump is theoretically not the first president to face off with courts. Presidents like Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln are often cited as examples of leaders who defied judicial authority. However, the myths surrounding their actions don't quite match with the reality. What Trump is doing right now is putting us in completely uncharted waters. For example, in Worcester versus Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled that the state of Georgia could not impose its laws on Cherokee land. And that case contributed to the horrible episode in American history known as the Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans were forcibly relocated. President Jackson criticized the court's ruling, and he allegedly said that Chief Justice, quote, John Marshall, has made his decision, now let him enforce it. But this quote is almost certainly apocryphal. Most articles about the presidency and the rule of law conclude that Jackson himself defied a court order, probably because of this probably incorrect quote. Jackson supported Georgia's defiance of the Supreme Court, and he did not send the marshals to enforce the Supreme Court's order. But it's a myth that he defied the court himself. Similarly, Lincoln is often thought to have defied the courts when he suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. In the case of ex parte Merriman, Supreme Court Justice Roger Taney considered whether to grant a habeas petition by John Merriman. Taney was sitting as a circuit court judge at the time, so this wasn't a Supreme Court case. But the military accused Merriman of operating a secessionist terror cell. When he was arrested, he filed a petition for habeas corpus, and Taney ordered the general in charge of Fort McHenry to appear at the hearing and to bring Merriman to the hearing itself. The government suspected Merriman of blowing up train tracks to prevent Congress and federal officials from reaching Washington, D.C., which would have cut D.C. off from the rest of the Union and could have altered the outcome of the Civil War.
I'm thinking of Brown v. Board of Education, or even in that situation, it's like it's states themselves refusing to abide by the precedent set by the Supreme Court. This is a direct action that the Supreme Court is making a demand over, and the only person that would enforce this action is the federal government. It completely undermines the checks and balances if the federal government refuses to follow. It's a fairly direct destruction of any kind of power that the judiciary has.
But the point is that Presidents Jackson and Lincoln did not directly ignore court orders in the way that the Trump administration seems to have been doing in these deportation cases.
Yeah, this is why I said it's like a little bit different, where it's the federal government not enforcing states' capacity to do harm versus the federal government directly refusing to answer to the judiciary. In practice, it's the same outcome, kind of, but like it is new.
So when the government arguably disregards a court order, judges usually start by clarifying their orders and giving the government a chance to comply. This is happening right now in dozens of cases involving Trump's illegal executive orders. If the government doesn't comply, then judges may find them in contempt. And one thing you'll notice about everything that we're talking about here today is that this is a slow process. Generally speaking, contempt of court is defined as any act which is calculated to embarrass, hinder, or obstruct a court in the administration of justice, or which is calculated to lessen the authority or dignity of a court.
Yeah, you could literally, like, that's the awesome power that courts technically have.
And when distinguishing between the types of contempt, there are two broad categories: criminal versus civil, and direct versus indirect. The problem is that the government is trying to prevent Judge Boasberg from undertaking the fact-finding necessary to develop a complete record about the flights to El Salvador. The judge has repeatedly asked the government to answer questions, but the government has refused to provide any answer. And then, sensing that Judge Boasberg was moving closer to a contempt finding, the administration suddenly claimed it was considering invoking the state secrets privilege. This prompted a new round of back and forth between Judge Boasberg and the government, which finally ended with the government asserting it had a national security reason to refuse to answer any questions about the flights. But it certainly seems like the administration's privilege argument seems to be made in bad faith. They didn't raise it until the judge continued to investigate, and a lot of the information about the flights is already in the public record, including a bunch of propaganda videos that they made at the time, and the first reference to privilege came from a declaration by an ICE official in a
I think none of this matters of the Supreme Court ruling saying his order was wrong. It still matters because the Supreme Court, just like the lower courts, it's still a part of the judiciary. So it technically still matters right now, depending on whether or not Trump will decide to do the damn thing that will eventually turn the U.S. Constitution into a piece of toilet paper. You know what I mean? I guess they could just keep stalling. That's usually how you can effectively refuse to comply with a direct order from the Supreme Court. Just kind of ignore it. This is one of the many cases that the Trump administration's actions have created that is boundary breaking, precedent setting, truly the next stage of American fascism. This is the moment where either the institutions start serving the fascist agenda and the rules, the legality doesn't matter anymore. It's more so an argument about morality. Like, this is the moment where, is slavery legal or not? Okay, that's basically it. You know how we talk about how laws don't mean anything if those laws are directly and openly unjustifiable, and we point to the racial purity laws in Nazi Germany or slavery laws in the United States of America. This means, are we crossing the legal Rubicon or not? Are we just completely dismantling any persuasive power that the judiciary has, therefore completely dismantling the judiciary, or I guess turning it into a puppet of the federal government, which in some instances it has acted like that regardless. But this is a very important moment, I think, in American history, depending on what the Trump administration does. As of a couple hours ago, the Supreme Court did decide unanimously to return the Maryland man that was falsely sent to El Salvador, despite having a previous court ruling that protected him because he had a withdrawal order. Facilitating without a deadline means nothing. They could just delay for years. No, I know. It could be ass covering from the Supreme Court so that they say, well, we gave the lawful order, but then we left it in an open-ended manner so they could just turn around and say, oh, we're trying to facilitate. We're following the lawful order of facilitation. That doesn't mean we're actually returning him. Yeah, new Supreme Court order requiring U.S. to facilitate return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia from El Salvador could open the door to similar legal claims by those Trump deported last month under the Alien Enemies Act. The language is vague, but logic would suggest they mean bring him back. Yes, but there's two different points here that are a matter of that could be up for contention. One, the fact that CCOT is in a sovereign nation, totally independent from the United States of America, which clearly is a legal argument that they're going to entertain. And the second part of the problem is, they'll claim that they are facilitating the return, but facilitating the return can mean tomorrow. It can mean 3 years from now. It can mean never. It was part of the reason why I said that the Biden administration, for example, had the power to de facto delay student loans. That is directly within the power of the executive. They can't outright, let's say the Supreme Court says you can't outright abolish student loan debt, but you could technically delay student loan debt permanently. It's a power that they have. It's a power that they've used. It's a power that they used during COVID. It was a matter of the Biden administration refusing to use that power that they had that stopped them from doing so.
Thursday night, the original judge handling the case, Judge Paula Zinnes of Maryland, ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia to the U.S. as soon as possible. The order gives the Department of Justice until 9:30 a.m. Friday to detail Abrego Garcia's location and the steps the U.S. has taken to bring him back. The development comes amid scathing criticism of the Trump administration for deporting 200-plus foreign nationals without any due process.
The Trump administration looks like more and more of a police state every day, and that's a country that none of us recognize.
The president of El Salvador is coming to the White House on Monday. Does President Trump want him to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia with him?
The Supreme Court made their ruling last night very clear that it's the administration's responsibility to facilitate the return, not to effectuate the return. I believe the...
Yep, classic. Oh, they're doing it. Oh, well, they're just saying facilitate. So no, we're not bringing him back right now. That is so psychotic. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah, we're facilitating. We're in the process of facilitation. You can't tell us what the timeline looks like. A lower court might, but then we'll kick the can back up to a higher court before we do that.
An attorney for Abrego Garcia appeared in court this afternoon. Here's what Abrego Garcia's lawyer said outside court while calling on the White House to abide by the Supreme Court's order to return his client.
The government attorney did say that they intend to comply with the order and bring him back. That's the bare minimum. They should have done that already. They've had plenty of time between the Supreme Court's order early yesterday evening and now. He should be here in the United States. It's a 5-hour flight.
But he's not. Let's bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, in Greenbelt, Maryland. So, Pierre, you were there?
Completely unhinged happening at every facet of government right now, but especially when it comes to this stuff.
The map now to Maryland, where video to our monitors shows the moment ICE agents smashed a car window and took a 51-year-old mother into custody. CBS News Baltimore's Tara Lynch. Chances that Garcia's already dead. Please, can you stop? I don't like... Why does everybody do this? Stop saying that he's already dead, okay? What an insane thing to say. Please. God damn, dude. Spoke to the woman.
I keep hearing like lib resistance accounts basically fucking post that over and over again without any evidence whatsoever. It's ridiculous.
Woman's daughter.
No! Oh, mommy!
You wouldn't think that you and your mom are going to work and suddenly they're taking your mom for no reason.
On March 31st in Westminster, Karen Cruz Barrios says she and her mother, Elsie Barrios, were driving to work when law enforcement pulled up behind them. ICE agents approached the car, asked for IDs, and told Berrios to step out. That's when she asked for a search warrant. Elsie Berrios is currently seeking affirmative asylum after her attorney says she entered the United States in 2017 undocumented. Cruz Berrios says the agents did not give a warrant to her mother, so she refused to get out. That's when they broke the window and unlocked the car.
No! Oh, mommy!
I would understand.
It's wild. Like, this is just totally illegal. I mean, not that any of this shit matters, but this is completely illegal. This is not a thing that you can't do any of this shit. And they're wearing masks. Makes me feel like they know what they're doing is illegal, you know? Gestapo.
Understand if they had a search warrant or anything for her, then okay, then, you know, you guys can, you know, take her out or give it to her and she can step out.
I'm pretty sure it's not illegal. It absolutely is. What are you talking about? That's your private property, your car. Just like your house is your, they can't just do a warrantless search and seizure like this. What are you talking about? The only difference in this circumstance, the only problem here is that there are constitution-free zones, technically, anywhere within 100 miles of a port of entry, an airport, you know, a beach, waterways is technically considered constitution-free zones, although this is a warrantless search and seizure being enforced on a person who literally has a court date. ICE is allowed to operate without any sort of constitutional limitations. They did, though. Illegal immigrants don't have rights. Yes, they do, you idiot. Of course they do. Everyone has rights. Undocumented and documented citizens and non-citizens alike have rights. The same rights that you do. The same rights that your shit stain of an existence has on U.S. soil, they also have. It's in the Constitution. You don't even know what this person's status is either. And they didn't either at that point. They just went in. They're like, oh, well, brown person. We can just break your car window and nab you. Good thing we don't have any due process anymore. Maybe they'll do that to you too. Grand Goober 444. Not that legality matters. Clearly, it's not like legality has stopped any of these assholes from behaving this way. Just straightforward Nazi shit, dude. Ay, ay, ay. Yeah, I saw the Mahmoud Khalil memo as well. It's right here, which is insane. This is also complementary to the thing that we're discussing. As you guys know, Mahmoud Khalil was also kidnapped and black bagged from Columbia University, where he resided as a green card holder for seemingly no crime whatsoever, but simply an awesome power that previously, at least as far as I understand, not really been utilized by the Secretary of the State. The justification for why he was black bagged was that he was determined to be a threat to American national security. The real reason as to why they were doing that, or at least the evidence they suggested as to why he was a threat to national security, was, well, as follows. This is what they said. Information provided by the DHS, ICE, HSI regarding the participation and roles of Bleep and Mahmoud Khalil in an anti-Semitic protest and disruptive activities which fosters a hostile environment for Jewish students in the United States. My determination is also based on citations for unlawful activity during this protest. The public actions and continued presence of, I don't know why this is censored, and Khalil in the United States undermine U.S. policy to combat anti-Semitism around the world and in the United States. In addition to the efforts to protect Jewish students from harassment and violence of the United States, consistent with Executive Order 14150, America First Policy Directive, to the Secretary of State, the foreign policy of the United States champions core American interests and the American citizens condoning anti-Semitic conduct and disruptive protests in the United States would severely undermine the significant foreign policy objective. No hard evidence whatsoever, but vague generalizations. Incredibly, incredibly dangerous. I don't think that the judge that required hard evidence will see this as like reason alone to justify the deportation. After the immigration judge in Mahmoud Khalil's case ordered the government to provide evidence to justify deporting him, this is what they filed. This is from Janine Yunus, Palestinian American civil liberties free speech attorney. I've been a lawyer for 14 years, she says, and a criminal defense lawyer for 9 of those years, and I've never seen anything like this. Totally nebulous, vague allegations about involvement in anti-Semitic protests and disruptive activities without any specific attributions of unlawful activity or even anti-Semitic speech to Khalil himself, which in any event is protected. The U.S. rightly does not have hate speech laws. That's the other side of this. Even if they were to ascribe anti-Semitic speech directly to Mahmoud Khalil, this would not actually be reason alone to deport him or to revoke his green card. Do you understand? So this would destroy the First Amendment. It would destroy it in its entirety. There would be no more First Amendment. This would be the boundary-breaking, precedent-setting case that would erode the constitutional protection that every citizen and non-citizen alike has in the United States of America. In the U.S. and all civilized societies, if the government is going to punish someone under the law, it had better provide evidence for specific forms of unlawful activity by the individual they're targeting. Not only has the government entirely failed to do that here, but it's obvious its case is predicated on punishing First Amendment protected speech and protest. Yeah, this speculation, I think, is not incorrect. My theory on what happened, Baytar, Canary Mission Fed senators fabricated lies past the DHS and ICE. Deportation orders were issued without vetting. They thought Khalil was on a visa, not green card. Now they look incompetent and have to reconsider their sources. Janine speculates further, says, agreed. I agree with the speculation, by the way, because they literally initially said that Mahmoud Khalil was on a student visa. That is too large of an error to make. It is shocking. And then they just continued along with it. Now they box themselves in and won't admit they made a mistake and maybe should have done a little work before accepting at face value the words of an explicitly genocidal terrorist group. Yeah. Anyway.
Things have gotten worse. Things have gotten much, much worse. And honestly, despite everything that's happening in the world, I think this ought to be the most important news story in the country. Now, this broke with 249 years of American legal precedent, and this could very well be the beginning of the end of one of our country's founding legal principles, the right to due process. None of the individuals detained have ever been found guilty of any crime, nor were any of them charged with one. Whether citizen or not, anyone detained by the US is entitled to due process as a constitutional right. But those rights are in question now. So first, a quick refresher of the facts, horrifying as they are. The named plaintiffs, identified only by their initials, are a group of 5 Venezuelan nationals who are being detained by the government. The lead plaintiff, JGG, arrived in the United States in March of 2024 and sought asylum. Like many of the other plaintiffs in this case, JGG was already going through the legal steps of the immigration process. He even had a hearing scheduled regarding his asylum application. And I will remind you, asylum is legal immigration. And while it may or may not be true that everything he has alleged is true, that's the purpose of the asylum process, to determine if it's true, and if it is, at the end of that process, he would be granted asylum and would be a legal resident in the United States. Apparently, though, that process was moving too slowly for the Trump administration. The administration detained him and then presented JGG, a native Spanish speaker, with papers in English while falsely claiming that he was going to be released. Once he signed those papers under that false pretense, the government whisked him away to a detention center in Texas. At 3 o'clock in the morning on March 14th, 2025, he was awakened by the guards and told that he was going to be transferred somewhere else. The guards refused to specify where he was going to be sent or why. That transfer was apparently thwarted by a mechanical problem with the plane, which allowed JGG to contact his attorney and file this lawsuit on the morning of March 15th. And I will also remind you that the plaintiffs were not seeking full residency in the United States. They were simply asking for regular due process and to let the process of the immigration courts play out. But in their lawsuit, plaintiffs stated that they had heard that the Trump administration planned to invoke the Alien Enemies Act to remove Venezuelans to El Salvador's notorious prison, the Terrorism Confinement Center. And to be clear, when I say that El Salvador's Terrorism Confinement Center is a torture prison, I'm not exaggerating. The BBC published a shocking expose on the prison in 2023, highlighting its various human rights abuses, which included overcrowding, no windows, fans, or air conditioners to combat the year-round tropical heat, no outside recreation, and no familial visitation. Scholars have stated that 375 detainees have died in Bukele's Salvadoran gulags, but some estimate that—
Bro, this stuff is so heinous. They got Legal Eagle to start making videos that are more overtly political than ever before. He normally wouldn't go this hard on anything. He's a liberal for sure, but in his commentary, you can kind of get a sense that like he defends the infallibility of institutions in general. He's not going to go above and beyond in terms of his commentary. I feel as though him, Philip DeFranco, many of these other guys, CoffeeZilla, regardless of their own personal biases, I feel like their commentary on issues such as this one have often been more restrained, and slowly but surely you see his commentary evolve through the process where it's just like they're sending people to a concentration camp.
The number is more than 1,000. So upon hearing that the president was about to invoke the Alien Enemies Act to send them to a torture prison, the plaintiffs understandably were terrified and implored the DC District Court to issue a TRO preventing them from being extraordinarily renditioned to El Salvador based on the groundless whims of the Trump administration. But the government has claimed that JGG and the rest of the plaintiffs are being renditioned because they are members of Tren de Aragua. The plaintiffs have all argued that this is not true. Several plaintiffs have pointed out that the government's suspicions are based on the specious fact that they have tattoos, including a tattoo of an eye and a tattoo of a rose and a skull.
And a tattoo of mom and dad, a tattoo of autism awareness. It is such an insanely high bar of punishment for such a low bar to clear. It's just like, I've never seen something so erroneous. It might as well be just like, I've decided your vibes are off, so sorry, you're going to perma jail.
The government has provided no evidence to support this assertion that any of the members are in fact members of Tren de Aragua. Now, in ordinary times, there are actual processes for adjudicating these kinds of questions of fact, and they're called courts. This is why courts exist. If the administration wanted to credibly accuse the plaintiffs of membership in Tren de Aragua, they could have pursued criminal charges or allowed plaintiffs to continue to work their way through the immigration system. But instead of gathering evidence and laying out a case against the plaintiffs, the Trump administration just stamped them with a terrorist gang members designation and sent them for an indefinite stay in a Salvadoran gulag. DC District Court Judge Boasberg came in on March 15th by issuing a TRO from removing any of the individuals.
Like, this is why he's a lib, you know what I mean? Because like Boasberg is not exactly a woke libtard himself, you know what I mean? He's a conservative judge that would have probably processed all of these deportations in the most expeditious manner. But the only reason why I didn't is because, you know, there was clearly no due process